Thank you and hello again. Thank you to Michigan State University for this invitation. It's a privilege and an honor. This is a recording of the presentation that we had together last week on the 28th. You know, for the last couple of years, I've been producing a series of science and design summits for architects and interior designers across the country. The response has been honestly overwhelming and game-changing for many, if not most, of those attendees. This talk will be a glimpse into some of the content offered in those summits. And you're going to notice a common thread running through this talk. And that thread is this: beauty, pleasure, nature, and fine design improve health. Science confirms it. You know, in the years to come, when you create fine design and beauty, you will improve health. You'll be considered by science to be an alternative health resource. Write it down and think of it this way: I am an alternative health resource. You know, I want to call out 6 major revelations that need special emphasis. They're kind of like the headlines of this talk. And science has now documented these as facts, and they should be new tools in every designer's toolkit. The need for aesthetic experiences is hardwired in our DNA. Evolutionary inheritance reminds us that we are who we were. We have an inexhaustible need to see faces. We have new technologies for design today that help chart the course for good design. They provide a roadmap. Humans, our species, have a fundamental need for nature, and fractal beauty is the highest aesthetic value in design. And if you don't know what a fractal is right now, you'll know it by the end of this talk. So here are a few high-level examples of how science is being used to influence our environment. Why does Amazon's headquarters have nest-like conference rooms hanging from the ceiling and a headquarters containing 390 different types of vegetation? Why did Etsy feel the need to turn their Brooklyn headquarters 100% biophilic? Look at the view on the right. The workstations are hanging cocoons. Why is the nation's #1 home furnishings retailer using biophilia and neuroaesthetics inside and out of their stores? And why is Microsoft building conference rooms in treetops? Now, I could show you hundreds more examples, but the bigger question is this: what science do these industries and companies know that motivate them to do this? What do these industry leaders know that we all might want to learn? And we'll answer those questions today. What's happening is that science has been studying us, the world of architecture and design. It's a convergence of science and design, and the word for it is neuroaesthetics. Neuro meaning the physiological in the brain, and aesthetics meaning beauty, pleasure, design, and nature. And I will tell you this from my study: science is far ahead of us in understanding the health benefits of good design and the beauty that we all provide. When design creates pleasure and beauty, we improve health. Now, let me give you some background on this from some of the names, some of the superstars in neuroaesthetics. One of the leaders in neuroaesthetics is Susan McSalmon at the International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins University. And she says the truth is that aesthetic experiences are hardwired in all of us. They are evolutionary imperatives encoded in our DNA as an essential part of our humanity. And they're fundamental to our health, well-being, and learning. So think about this for a minute. The need for what design does, what you will be doing in the months and years ahead, that need is hardwired. It's an evolutionary imperative. It's encoded in our DNA. You know, translated as designers, we are a needed part of our client's existence, and science confirms it. You know, now I want to further explore this idea that aesthetics are important and actually essential to our well-being. Professor Harry Malgrave is a world-renowned neuroscientist from the University of Pennsylvania and more recently the Illinois Institute of Technology. And he says beauty, like art, is a neurological activity, an urge for and feeling of pleasure, and associated with awe and wonder. Now, those are nice words, but let's pick this apart just a little. Neurological. The benefit design provides is not just emotional, which is hard to measure and calculate. It's physical. And it's such, it can be scanned, biomapped, and quantified. And take the words urge for. And scientists like this choose their words carefully. He says urge for means beauty, art, and design are not an elective or a passive interest. They are a compulsion. We've survived over the millennia because we sought out pleasure and beauty. We ran towards it. Now, I want to expand on this evolutionary imperative thing and the need for aesthetics being encoded in our DNA. And I've been working recently with Ann Sussman, who's a professor of cognitive architecture at Boston Architectural College. And she says, understanding that our brain is an artifact of 3.6 billion years of evolution frames the new direction for design and architecture. Now think about that quote. To understand who we are, we need to better understand who we have been. And honestly, what's been really eye-opening for me over the last several years is realizing that we're all in the middle of this incredible R&D experiment, that we're the sum, the aggregate of who we have been, and we're contributing to who we will be millions of years from now. Now, it's honestly, it's rather profound. And to better understand this, what I've done is position a string of slides next that will help us understand and understand the timeline, but also relate to the opportunity before us. So hang in there with me. Let's start by going back to the very beginning of our evolutionary history. This is where we grew up. We forget this, don't we? You're probably sitting in a room right now with a ceiling, a wall, and you have your iPhone right next to you. But you know what? We didn't wake up to an iPhone alarm. We woke up only to the sounds of wind, nature, streams, the flutter of wings, and the sheer aesthetic beauty of nature. Look deep into this image. You can almost feel the mossy texture. You can smell the pine. They were our daily expectations and assumptions for millions of years. And can you begin to see now the thread as to why Microsoft is building conference rooms in treetops? There were no steel girders, no brick walls, no computers. This is what our brains adapted to. Our views were distant. Think for a minute, how often today do we get to see further than just across the street? Views have been essential to our being for the millennia. And we'll talk more about views in just a few minutes. It's important to understand that the brain, who we are today, evolved in a biocentric world, not a machine-regulated world. This is the savannah where we lived and adapted. You know, this was our habitat, a place which nurtures. Everyone listening to this talk right now has inherited what you see. And you know, millions of years ago, we lived with the rabbits, the deer, the wolves, the plant life trees, with no separation from them. We were all together. Today, though, you know, we consider ourselves the evolved species, but the difference today is that the rabbits and deer are still in their natural environment. We are not. And, you know, as an exclamation point to this, Nigel Nicholson, the scholar out of the UK, says you can take the person out of the Stone Age, but you cannot take the Stone Age out of the person. We are who we were. But here's the problem. This is where we live today. Anything human-centric about this? What's human-centric about a bunch of boxes? You know, the famous poet Carl Sandburg wrote in 1957, "We live in the time of the colossal upright oblong." He got it. A man of words couldn't find warm emotional words to describe the new urban environment. Now, the question is this: if aesthetic experiences are required as a result of our DNA and our evolutionary inheritance, what in the world have we done to ourselves over the last century? Do you have an idea now of where I'm going with this positioning of slides, this train of thought? Look at the incredible need there is for what you will be doing in the years ahead. The need to balance an environment which is unnatural and, yes, unhealthy to the human. The science and design is confirming it. What we're trying to do with the science and design is give us a perspective and a reminder of just how important all of us on this call are and how badly needed we are. Actually, how important you are. I'm a marketing guy. I don't create aesthetics and beauty like you do. You don't want me designing anything. But I do know this: providing aesthetics, nature, and beauty, what the design industry does, balances the world we live in today and improves the health and well-being of the human species. It's actually now our obligation. Now, as I pull this section together, I want to read a quote from Susan McSalmon, who summarized her talk that she gives to science and design periodically. She says, "Our brains and bodies are always sensing and interpreting the world around us. And we know that the design of spaces impacts our biology. The opportunity to use this knowledge to design and create intentional spaces that support our health and well-being. That is the future of design. That is your future, MSU, your future as an alternative health resource." And by the way, you're getting a big burst of serotonin right now because of the image on the right. The image is the Unitarian Church in Charleston, South Carolina, a perfect example of fractal beauty, which we'll be discussing in just a few minutes. And by the way, it's not just neuroscience saying this, it's the medical industry as well. Dr. Douglas Wood of the Mayo Clinic, he heads up the Center for Innovation at the Mayo Clinic, talks about our industry as having patients as clients because the future of medicine is in the home. Why? Because the home prevents and it cures. And the quote that has absolutely spun the heads of the designers who have attended this seminar in the past is from the head of environmental medicine at the University of Texas. And she says, "Architects and designers have a greater ability to improve public health than medical professionals." And I hope this is one of those aha moments for you. I hope you're now thinking, wow, that's where I'm headed? Yes, it is. And for the future designers in the room, change the first three words, take them out, take out architects and designers and put in the word I, and say it with me. I will have a greater ability to improve public health than medical professionals. And science confirms it. So says Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, neuroscientists and scholars of neuroaesthetics around the world. So I say to you, moving forward, own it. This is the future of the design industry. Okay, I want to switch now and talk about what's happening in the world of technology that is impacting the design industry. It's technology that should become tools for you. We're talking about wearable technology at first. I'm going to talk to you about a second and third technology in a minute. Wearable technology that studies the attention and emotional responses to our built environment. And when we say wearables, we're talking about eye tracking glasses. We're talking about wristbands that measure cardio and GSR, which is galvanic skin response. And they have the potential to be game changers in our industry. So let me show you how they've been used in two different cases. You've already heard from Susan McSalmon Well, she and Suchi Reddy and Google Technology in 2019 built 3 different rooms at the Milan Design Week, the Salone di Mobile fair in Milan. And each room had a different visual, each room had a different sensorial experience. Attendees were asked to spend a minimum of maybe 5 minutes in each room wearing the Google wristband that was measuring cardio and biological reaction. And just the result was incredible, because at the end of the 3 different rooms, Johns Hopkins was able to tell the attendees which room gave them the most positive cardio and biological response, just because of a wristband, the new technology. Think about this. Imagine using this type of technology in your conference room in the future, where you put a wristband on one of your clients. You show her or him 50 or 60 different slides and images, and you're able to tell from their reaction to those images which kind of design will be most palatable for them. I can't emphasize enough how much this is a potentially game-changing event in our industry. A second example of this new technology is slightly different. It's with the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, the only museum in the country with a neuroscientist on staff. It's similar to the Milan study, only in this case, they're using eye tracking glasses that will measure how we fixate on different images and document it. So they were measuring how much time was being spent on a particular work of art versus the text next to the art. Did the eye flicker from one to the other? Did it look beyond a particular image down the hallway? All of this was done in the attempt to create a better, I guess, experience in the museum, and to drive the patron or provide an opportunity of why they should come back to that particular museum. Very exciting for our industry. Now before I move on yet to a third technology, I need to introduce a slightly different thought, and that is talking about our unconscious mind, or the subliminal brain. And I won't get too deep into the science here, but understanding a little bit more about this will help us with the upcoming slides. Eric Kandel is a Nobel Prize winner in physiology, and he says 95% of our brain activity is beyond our conscious awareness. All of our conscious thoughts and actions are unconscious first. Folks, we're skating through life. We could live an entire life without a conscious thought, which means first impressions are really, really important. We have up to 3 or 4 seconds to attract attention. After that, the conscious mind kicks in. As designers, where do you want the mind's eye to go, and what subliminal reaction do you want to be triggered when someone walks into the room you've just designed? Now, I want to show you an example so that you're actually feeling this, an example of how the unconscious works. I'm going to show you on the next slide 3 geometric shapes and forms. And I want you to be aware of what you experience when you see them, what you experience immediately in a millisecond. Okay, here we go. 3 geometric shapes. All right, time's up. Your unconscious mind is in control for roughly 3 seconds. Now we see three shapes, don't we? But we see something more. Of course, we see facial hierarchy. What just happened in this little experiment is exactly what happens every minute of every day. Our unconscious subliminal brain is in control of the first 3 to 4 seconds of seeing and experiencing something new. Our evolutionary inheritance kicks in automatically. It's not elective. It's encoded in our DNA. So the question for you is, when you design, are you designing for the subliminal brain? Are you designing to grab attention on the first 2 or 3 seconds? Now think about this for a second. If you're a builder, You want to generate curb appeal. You have 3 seconds to grab the attention of your potentially next buyer. Okay, now before we go to the third technology, I want to stick with this idea of faces and their importance for just a couple of slides. To quote from Don Ruggles and his book, Beauty, Neuroscience, and Architecture, at birth, 65% of the structure of our brain is dedicated to facial recognition. And it doesn't leave us, even as adults. Science has now documented that much of our brain is devoted to seeking out facial imagery. Why? Because it helps us orient ourselves, to calm ourselves, and feel a connection. It's because we evolved in nature as a social species among other animals. Think evolutionary inheritance. For example, how many times have we looked at the front of a car and seen a face? Let me show you just a few examples. You know, as kindergartners or first graders, we're asked to draw our home. And look at what we default to as an image. We see it in architecture. And by the way, I want you to notice on this slide and the next couple of slides, it doesn't take you but a millisecond to not see architecture, but to see something that is comforting and reassuring. Think this is how we might feel after having one too many the night before. Be aware of the unconscious at work. And I have to tell you, I had a lot of fun finding these slides. It works for interior design, and it's the reason major marketers have chosen facial hierarchy to market their brand. You know, they could have chosen so many other things. The Colonel could have chosen a chicken or a drumstick. Starbucks could have chosen a coffee bean, Amazon a truck, Pringles a chip. But no, they chose facial images in order to more easily connect to us, their fellow human beings. And if there's any doubt in your mind as to whether faces are important, let's all be reminded of what we as people have chosen to help us convey emotions. Now, with this background and understanding of the absolute importance of the subliminal brain, the unconscious mind, I'm going to show you one more technology. And it's from 3M, and it's called VAS, Visual Attention Software. And it's different from the first examples I gave because in this case, it has the capability of predicting where our eyes our brain, eyes are merely a tool of the brain, where our eyes will be drawn first and immediately. The thing about our brain that is captured by VAS is that we are attracted to certain different characteristics in an image. And those characteristics are edges, color contrast, intensity, and faces. Think of millions of years contrasting a blue sky to a green tree canopy. Think of walking up and leaning over the edge of a precipice, only to know that if we took one more step, it's unsafe. Now, we're going to play around with VAS for the next few slides. And so I'm going to start with showing you a room image. Excuse me. And I'm going to ask you to try and capture, and it's really hard. To think about your subliminal from a conscious mind perspective. But I want you to think just in terms of where you think the unconscious mind, the first glance mind is what they call it. Where will it be attracted? Okay, take a look. 2, 3. All right, now you've just moved from the subconscious back to the conscious. So where do you think the subliminal brain, our first glance, will be attracted? When we do this in person, most people think the color contrast at the headboard. Some of them talk about the view outside. Let's take a look at what VAS tells us. One of their measuring tools is called gaze sequencing. They can actually measure where the eye will move first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. And so what this tells us is that the first the first attention grabbing element is the color contrast of the chair outside the door. The second is the edge of the footboard. The third is the color contrast at the headboard, and then we go back to the chair. Okay, let's take a look at how this is being used, and actually how I've just used it a couple of months ago with one of my clients. This is an ad that my company prepared for Sarah Z Designs in Miami, and we were quite happy with the image. It did a lot of the things that we wanted, and then you know what? I said, let's run it through VAS and see if there's any level of confirmation. And so we took this ad, which we liked. We liked the logo, the tagline, the elements, and we ran it through VAS, and lo and behold, we were pretty happy. This is the heat mapping measuring tool from VAS. So it caught the logo, it caught the tagline, it caught the elements. Virtually the whole page was catching the eye. And so we were pretty happy. So we went ahead and produced a 2-page version of that ad. And we looked at this and we said, okay, this looks great. We're just about ready to send it to a magazine to be published. And I thought, you know what, let's run it through VAS one more time. Uh-oh. Here's what happened. So the original page was still getting all the attention, but actually her project, the work that she did, was not getting attention. So we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, how do we create a 2-page ad for a magazine that works? And we went back to the VAS, what VAS measures, you know, what our brain is attracted to, edges and color contrast and intensity. And lo and behold, here's what we ended up with, and we loved it. Just loved it. Both pages were getting attention. And of course, as I mentioned, facial hierarchy, faces in general, get a lot of attention. We actually lit it up with this spread. Okay. Now, when I got to Lansing, I saw this and I said, wait a minute, I got to run this through the technology. And here's Beaumont Tower. And whoever it was that designed this way back when knew what he was doing. Look at the attention it's getting throughout the entire tower. Now, here's another case where VAS can be used to help avoid pitfalls. I spoke earlier this year at the flooring show in Las Vegas. And this image is a very common photographic approach. Lots of space for the flooring material. These guys in that industry love showing their product. Now, and this is an ad that's stripped of its logo and no other information. And based on what you've just heard, what do you think will happen here? Are you attracted to anything in particular? Are you attracted to the floor? Or is your subliminal brain attracted to somewhat of a facial hierarchy? Yes. Edges? Yes. Color contrast? Yes. What's not getting attention is the floor. And when I showed this in a room full of flooring dealers, there was actually a groan in the audience. I recently consulted with a major production builder in the US and Canada and decided to run several of their images through the VAS technology, the software, and look at what happens. The most important element in building a home in a production manner, not a custom home, but the most important aspect is curb appeal. Everything but the facade itself is getting attention. The bushes, the tree on the left, the sky, up against the roof line, and the palm trees on the right. I think the point that neuroaesthetics is making is this: when you approach design from the perspective of the unconscious mind, the subliminal brain, you are likely to see a design method that will enhance your ability to connect with your targeted audience. Okay? All right, so I want to move now to the last major segment of this talk. Let's take a look at this quote from Naisbitt. We will have a greater need to compensate for technology by being out in nature more often, going camping, going to the seashore. You may have to drag your children away from the computer or video games to take them fishing or bicycling. He's pretty much on target, isn't he? And he wrote that in 1982. How prescient. He was able to see what we needed as a human species because of the direction we were moving with an urban environment and technology that was relatively unhealthy for our species. And so we've been talking about how beauty, nature, and design improve health. We also know that the original aesthetics for our species were born from nature. So that brings us to a discussion of biophilia. What is biophilia? And biophilic design, bio means nature, philia means love of. And so biophilia is essentially love of nature. It's a return to our roots. Sorry for the pun. And it is a tool that improves health. And just a reminder, prior to 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, when we first began to commune as a people and construct shelters, aesthetic beauty was only found in nature. Shepley Bulfinch is a world-renowned architectural firm out of Boston, and the head of the firm, Sonia Bacard, says the theory of biophilia says that because we've spent most of our evolutionary history, there's those words again, evolutionary history in nature, we have an innate love of nature and natural settings. We are linked to nature physically, cognitively, and emotionally. We don't have a choice. We aren't just in nature. We are nature. All of us, everyone listening to this call right now needs to first understand that we're of the animal species, just like those that we lived with tens and 20,000 years ago. And as it relates to all of us in this room, creators of design, Stephen Keller, the author of Nature by Design, goes a step further in his book and saying that natural form can be considered as the compositional grammar for creating unending varieties of design, art, and architecture. Look at this image. Look at the pure beauty and simplicity of how nature is inspiring interior design. Now, I mentioned that biophilia and biophilic design improves health. So before we get into applying and using biophilia, I want to confirm for you so that we all clearly understand the health benefits of biophilic design, of connecting ourselves with bringing nature into the built environment. And we're going to start right here. This is not really a study, but it's proof positive. This is the Kutek Phuat Hospital in Singapore. 100% biophilic design. Look at the color contrast. Look at the greenery. Look at the natural color tones. Look at the views. Anybody designing a hospital today, any architect or design firm designing a hospital first makes a pilgrimage to Singapore to see this hospital. It is that world renowned. This is the St. James University Hospital in the United Kingdom. Look at the lyrical movements on the wall, on the ceiling. Look at the natural color tones, the abundance of natural sunlight, the pockets of greenery. By the way, that lyrical movement is classic fractal beauty. So here's the question. If the medical industry around the world is using biophilic design to improve the health of their patients, shouldn't we be using it to improve the health of our patients? This is a couple of studies now. This is the Rusk Institute in New York a couple of years ago, and they prescribed for 107 cardiac patients time spent in a nursery, not just to walk through the nursery, but to literally put their hands in the dirt and plant flowers. The results was a decrease in the heart rate of 5 beats per minute, approximately a 6 to 7% improvement in the usage of the heart, just for planting flowers. This is a study that was done in the early 1990s by Chiba University in Japan. And it's a study of Shinrin-yoku. When translated, it means forest bathing. What the medical industry did in Japan was prescribe for 420 different patients time spent in the forest. The result was a 12.4% decrease in cortisol levels and a 6% decrease in the heart rate. This has become so important in Japan that Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing, is now a medicine. Instead of prescribing a bottle of pills, you go to the doctor says literally, go spend an hour in the forest for the next 2 weeks instead of a bottle of pills. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about applying biophilic design. And a lot of people, when you start looking at this subject, a lot of people think that adding a piece of greenery makes a room biophilic, but it's just not true. Biophilia is really a complex of learning rules that really were developed by us over thousands of years of evolution and the human versus environment interaction. There are multiple characteristics that are applied to biophilic design, but we're only going to talk about 4 of them for the sake of time. And each of these 4 has a connection to this evolutionary inheritance that I've been talking about. And they are prospect and refuge, organized complexity, modes of mystery, which was a surprise to me, and the use of patterns and fractals. Let me take you back 100,000 years. This is where it started for us. This is what's in our DNA. No lights, no heaters, no alarm clocks, no lock on the front door. This is where we lived. Prospect focuses on the perception of long distances, suggesting opportunity and awe. And refuge provides enclosed spaces that give us protection, security, a sanctuary. You can just imagine ourselves 50 and 100,000 years ago, maybe having a fire burning in front of this cave to keep away the animals. But this was our refuge. This is where we lived. And this is what we saw. It's in our DNA. And it's the reason that things like window seats with a view out the window to what could be are so important. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that when we go to a hotel, what's the one of the things that we ask? Which room has the view? We'll pay extra for it. And this is why. Organized complexity in nature. Look at the multitude of lines, geometries, and scales, all blended into this gorgeous image of beauty. All elements that are highly complex, but very organized. And by the way, science now knows that one of the reasons we're attracted to organized complexity is that our brains have evolved into the perfect organized and complex organ. We seek out organized complexity. And by the way, biophilia is taking us back to the original definition of the word geometry. Most of us, when we think of geometry, think of triangles and 90-degree angles and rectangles. But the original interpretation, the Latin root, is this: geo meaning earth, metry meaning measure. Geometry means measuring the earth. And here's what organized complexity could look like today. Yes, over the top, I know, but this is the famous Gaudí's La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Isn't this absolutely exquisite? Imagine breaking ground in 1880, knowing that you will never finish your dream, your ideal. Now, it is supposed to be finished sometime in 2024. Now, the Sagrada Familia has taken 144 years to complete. Now, just in case, hypothetical here, just in case your future clients don't want to wait 144 years to experience organized complexity, Here's what it looks like today. Another example. I love this. I wish I knew where that restaurant was. And this organized complexity will take slightly less time. All right, modes of mystery. I have to admit, you know, when I heard the word mystery, I didn't necessarily associate it with interior design, yet it is a powerful, powerful motivating force in our search for well-being. What's at the end of that trail? What's behind the trees on the right? There's a sense of positive anticipation. What can I discover next? I wonder what's around the corner. This is in our DNA. This is what we lived with over the millennia. And here's what it might look like today. Partially obscured views, long hallways. I might add curved walls. We'll do the same thing for you. Okay, now the fourth design element just may be the most important. We're talking about patterns for our brain, but we're primarily talking about fractal beauty, the beauty of patterns. And fractal is an odd word, I know. It doesn't roll off the tongue easily, fractal. But it's an important, it's a really important design element. Fractals are self-similar patterns over a range of magnification scales. They're continuous, consistent, and similar geometric images. And a fern is a perfect example of fractal beauty. The nodule, the very tip of that fern, is the same image as what's at the base of that fern. Now, if you were to take a microscope and look into the tip, the very nodule, you would find that the cellular structure of that image actually is the same or similar to the larger form of the product, the global view of the product. And as we've said, as part of our evolutionary inheritance, part of it is the appreciation for and need for complex environments. We need fractal scales and rich patterning. And Stephen Keller, and this may be one of the most important statements in this talk, for us to remember that humans, us, have evolved to thrive in complex yet coherent fractal environments. Now get this next sentence. We perceive fractal environments as having the highest aesthetic value. Now put this together for a minute with where we started in this talk. You had Susan McSalmon saying we have a fundamental need for aesthetic experiences. We have Stephen Keller saying that the highest aesthetic value in design is a fractal environment. So putting them together, we're saying, and they're actually saying, that the way to satiate, to serve that fundamental need for aesthetics is to use fractal beauty. And by the way, you're looking at the solar-powered treescapes in Singapore's gardens by the bay. Now, Richard Taylor is also one of our presenters in the summits that we've been doing, and he's renowned around the world as a specialist in fractal fluency. He actually thinks of it as a language, and he says fractals are the basic building blocks of nature. Every element of nature is born from some type of fractal, and here's a great example of a slice of our human body, our circulatory system, juxtaposed up against the tree canopy. And I would dare say that you could flip the colorations and they would look virtually the same. What's interesting, he has also measured and documented that we spend billions of dollars a year on stress-related illnesses. And a lot of it's related to the fact that we are no longer communing with nature. But he has measured that engaging with nature's fractals reduces stress up to 60%. Think of the money that we could save in pharmaceuticals just by employing biophilia and fractal beauty. He goes on to say that fractals are the fingerprints of nature, and there's no better example than this. Fractals are nature-made. Fractals are man-made. And here's an example of putting the two of them together. This is a home of an interior designer in Coconut Grove, right outside of Miami. And look at the way that she has a mesh screen on the stairwell. She has a tree canopy and abundance of natural light. Look at the way she has organized the artwork on the wall, continuous geometric patterns in different scales. Look at the mesh on the screen out the back window. Now, if you were to literally stand in that exact same spot and turn around 180 degrees, here's what you would see. Prospect and refuge, fractal beauty, abundance of sunlight. Now, I want to be sensitive with these, as I said last week, I want to be sensitive with these next couple of slides because I know what happened at the campus earlier this year. I'm also sensitive, really sensitive to it because for the last 12 years, I've lived in Parkland, Florida, 1 block from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. But I'm doing this because I want to show you an example of how fractals and biophilia are used to heal, because they're just so beneficial. This is an elementary school that just replaced one that had to be torn down. It's in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. The mandate to the architects was to design a healing environment, and they've done just that with the use of biophilia and fractal beauty. Look at the curvature of the roof line. There are no straight lines or right angles in nature. Look at the coloration of the front facade. The school itself is actually concave. Look at the fractal fluency of the stone wall. Look at the lyrical movement of the canopy over the front door. Let's go inside. Look at the treescapes, the natural color tones, the patterns on the floor. Look at the mystery of what's at the end of that hallway. My gosh, I wonder what it could be. Well, here it is. Color contrast, an abundance of natural light, fractal shadows on the floor, fractal patterns in the carpet. Look at the soft movement of the furnishings. What 7-year-old wouldn't be delighted to be in that space? Our industry, now including neuroaesthetics and biophilic design, the science in design that now heals kids and a community. Designers and architects using their skills to heal. It's the future for everyone on this call. And it's exciting, it's validating, it's inspiring, and there's nothing more rewarding than realizing your ability to change the lives of your patients. This is where it started for me. It was December 15th, 2015. I was having lunch with an architect in Denver. I was still publisher of Lux Magazine. His name was Don Ruggles, and Don started talking about beauty and how beauty heals and how design heals. And how he'd been talking with Johns Hopkins and the Salk Institute and neuroscientists. I could have sat there for hours listening to him. A year later, Don published this book, Beauty, Neuroscience, and Architecture. And at that point, I decided to leave the publishing world and devote my time and energy to helping the interior design industry realize its role as an alternative health resource. Now, I want to also mention that Don went on to be executive producer of the film documentary Built Beautiful. And you can get it on YouTube and other streaming services. And I heartily recommend you get it. It's narrated by Martha Stewart, very professionally done, and quite an eye-opener. I also want to recommend another book. This is from Ann Sussman, the professor I mentioned earlier. The book is titled Cognitive Architecture. She's a little more academic, but she covers so much of, in a more detailed way, of what Don covers in his book. It's a great 1-2 punch to get introduced to this subject matter. I also want to let you know that because of all the summits and the presentations we've done over the last 2 years, the design industry has come to us asking us to develop a certification course for the science and design. So we're in the middle right now. My team, we're all in the middle of producing this certification course that will be available for designers by the fall of this year. We're also in early conversations with PBS to develop a TV series, the Science and Design TV series on PBS. And here's where I want to leave you with a quote from Harry Malgrave. He says, "I believe we're on the verge of a revolution in the way that we approach design. It will no longer be guided by the speculative constructs of borrowed theory." Don't you love the way these guys talk? "But rather by a more basic understanding of the human organism and its existential engagement with the built environment. This is the epiphany that needs to take place." And you know, I've read this quote dozens, maybe 100 times. And every time I read it, it fills me with awe. Are we all hearing a wake-up call? When's the last time you sat through a design presentation with an image like this? Maybe our friends in medicine and neuroscience know our needs and see our opportunity better than we do. The medical industry, the sciences are ahead of us. So let's catch up. And by the way, let's change the last sentence and let it be that you, the designers and architects of tomorrow, be the epiphany that needs to take place. So I want to thank you, and I appreciate it. I hope this was helpful to you. And as I mentioned in Lansing, I'm available. Please feel free to reach out to me, mike@visionarydm.com. I love the subject and I'm always glad to help. And I really mean that. So thank you very much. And stop the recording.